I was at a dinner party last week, and the conversation, it turned to relationships, and that's when I saw it. I witnessed this shift happen in real time.
Oh, yeah.
My friend's boyfriend, who I've always known as this super laid-back, easygoing guy, he suddenly leaned in with this, I don't know, this intense, almost rehearsed seriousness.
Like he was performing.
Exactly. He didn't just have an opinion. He started reciting terminology. He was talking about high-value males and hypergamy with the fervor of a religious convert.
Wow.
He even pulled out his phone to show me a clip of some podcast host, some guy in sunglasses just yelling about biological imperatives. And he looks at me and says, "See, this is the only guy making sense right now. He's unplugging people from the matrix."
The red pill metaphor right there.
Right. And to him, these internet gurus were offering a roadmap to power. He kept going on about being stoic and holding frame, insisting that men needed to be these emotionless leaders to command respect.
The classic stoicism argument.
But then the cracks appeared. The waiter accidentally brought him the wrong drink. And for someone who had just spent 20 minutes preaching about stoic detachment and alpha control, his reaction was, well, it was jarring. He didn't just calmly correct the mistake.
He snapped.
He got visibly flustered, his face turned red, and he actually sulked for the rest of the appetizer course, complaining that he was being disrespected.
By a Diet Coke.
And that instant contradiction, preaching the gospel of the unshakable alpha while being completely dismantled by a simple mistake, it was fascinating.
It's so telling.
It really made me realize that the sudden obsession with red pill ideology wasn't actually about strength or truth. It looked a lot more like a desperate, confused attempt to find a script for a world that made him feel powerless.
That's such a perfect illustration of the central conflict here, the brittleness underneath the performance.
Right. It crystallized the whole thing for me. And that's exactly what this deep dive is all about today. We're really going to investigate those psychological vulnerabilities.
And the societal pressures, too.
Exactly. The pressures that are driving men toward these increasingly rigid and, frankly, pretty harmful ideologies like the red pill and, the incel communities.
We want to analyze the measurable impact. Because it's not just talk. It has real effects.
On relationship dynamics, on their own individual mental health. We have a whole stack of research here that really outlines the scope of the problem. Everything from, the psychological profiles of people who adhere to this stuff to the actual mechanical failures of the platforms that amplify it all.
And that phenomenon you just described, that emotional brittleness masked by this performative dominance, that is precisely the contradiction that the data illuminates.
So it's a known pattern.
It's a huge pattern.
Yeah.
We are dealing with a crisis that's growing, and it's growing rapidly. It's fueled by, on one hand, a really severe male mental health crisis that is looking for some kind of justification.
An explanation for the pain.
Yes. And on the other hand, systemic algorithmic failures. I mean, systems that are literally designed to maximize rage and isolation.
So our sources really connect these bigger, more abstract ideas
to the specific quantified findings. We can actually see how deep-seated vulnerability accelerates radicalization. And we're going to explore some of the evidence-based ways to intervene, both, in your personal relationships and within therapeutic settings, because the need for effective counter-strategies has just never been higher. Okay, so let's unpack this.
Where do we even begin? It feels like there's a whole new vocabulary you have to learn just to understand what's happening.
That's exactly the right place to start. We need a clear shared understanding of the terminology because these terms, they really define an entire ideological landscape.
Right.
When people talk about red pill or the manosphere, they're often referring to distinct, though sometimes overlapping, systems of belief.
It feels less like one single unified group and more like an ecosystem of grievance,
It's the perfect way to put it. It is an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So if someone is encountering this world for the first time, let's establish the crucial terms. Let's start with incel. It's probably the most specific and often the most extreme term. It stands for involuntary celibate.
So it's about not being able to find a partner.
At its root, yes. The term defines individuals, overwhelmingly men, who believe they are unable to form sexual or romantic relationships, even though they have a strong desire for them.
But it's become more than just a description, right?
Oh, much more. While it starts as a description of a relational status, it very quickly morphs into participation in online communities. And these communities are characterized by just profound misogynistic hostility and these shared narratives of chronic rejection.
So it takes a personal feeling of failure.
And it frames it as a collective identity. We are the rejected ones.
Okay, so if incel is this specific identity that results from, the failure to connect, where do terms like manosphere and red pill fit in? Are those the mechanisms for turning that isolation into an ideology?
Exactly. The manosphere is the bigger, sort of decentralized network of online communities. So you're talking about the forums, the subreddits, the video channels, all the places that promote these red pill philosophies.
And the red pill is the philosophy itself.
Yes. It's a very powerful metaphor, right? Borrowed from the Matrix. It suggests you're waking up to some harsh, objective truth about gender relations that everyone else is blind to.
And it's often framed as self-help, isn't it?
Deceptively so. In its milder forms, it's presented as self-improvement or male self-reliance. But the core philosophy, what you find underneath, almost always promotes views that frame women as inherently manipulative or transactional or, intellectually inferior. It provides the exact script that your friend's boyfriend was reciting at that dinner party.
It sounds like the red pill offers an explanation, a reason for why the world feels so unfair to them. But you mentioned there's an even more extreme end of this spectrum.
There is. And that's the black pill. If the red pill is the gateway, the black pill is the ideology of absolute deterministic hopelessness.
Hopelessness? What does that mean?
Adherents to this belief, they argue that attractiveness is genetically fixed. You either have it, you're a Chad, or you don't. And that's it. Game over.
So no amount of self-improvement matters?
None. They argue that modern society is entirely rigged against unattractive men, leaving them with absolutely no hope for romantic or sexual success.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your effort is, your career, your personality, nothing.
It's an ideology of deterministic nihilism.
Simply put, it says, the system is rigged and there is no way out for you.
And then there's one more term we see a lot, MGTOW, men going their own way. How does that fit into this radicalization pipeline?
MGTOW is a really significant subgroup. They advocate for men to intentionally avoid all romantic and sexual relationships with women.
Why?
The belief is that the legal and social systems are just too biased against men. They'll cite things like divorce courts, paternity risk, financial vulnerability.
So it's framed as a choice. I'm not rejected, I'm opting out.
Exactly. It's presented as a positive lifestyle choice focused on male autonomy. But the research is clear. It almost always includes very strong anti-feminist and grievance-driven undertones.
And you said it's an entry point.
It's a crucial psychological entry point. For men who are looking for a community to validate their pain, it's a first step. It often serves as a stop on the road toward more radical, more misogynistic, and more hateful ideologies like the black pill. It basically legitimizes the retreat from society.
Okay, so we have the vocabulary down. The central question now is, why? Why do these deeply cynical, angry, and let's be honest, ultimately self-defeating narratives grab hold of men who are so clearly suffering from intense loneliness and vulnerability?
Right. Why does this toxicity initially feel like the answer? Why is this their chosen form of self-medication?
It's a huge question.
And it comes down to some very basic human needs just not being met. The underlying motivation almost always is that these men are actively seeking relief from profound emotional pain.
So it starts with the wound.
It starts with a wound. They're often entering these communities right after an acute experience of rejection or social isolation, intense loneliness, betrayal, some kind of deep hurt.
And the communities welcome them.
They do more than welcome them. The power of these communities is that they provide a unique and, I'd say, dangerous form of validation. Mm-hmm. They don't dismiss the pain. Mm-hmm. Instead, they acknowledge it. Yes, you were hurt, and it wasn't fair.
And then what?
And then they immediately justify the resulting anger by providing an external enemy to blame. The ideology essentially tells the man, your pain is real and it's not your fault, it's their fault.
That relief must be psychologically massive, especially for men, in Western culture who are so often socialized to just suppress emotions like sadness or fear or vulnerability.
Oh, absolutely.
If you can't express sadness, you often just channel it into anger.
You do. The system rewards aggression, not vulnerability. And beyond that validation, there is this intense need for structure and control.
The world feels chaotic, so they look for rules.
Think about the modern world, right? Economic stability is increasingly fragile, social roles are shifting so fast, and the rules around dating and masculinity can feel incredibly complex and ambiguous.
It's confusing for a lot of people.
It is. And for men who feel lost or directionless or disempowered by all this complexity, this ideology offers seemingly clear, rigid rules. It's a deterministic, predictable script for navigating relationships and social dynamics.
It simplifies the world.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This rigidity, it acts as a psychological lifeline of certainty in what feels like a fast-changing, chaotic world. The source material describes how, for many, this toxicity initially tasted like medicine for their isolation.
The narrative of certainty.
That's it. Instead of having to grapple with complex personal factors like maybe you have rejection sensitivity or social anxiety or just poor communication skills, the ideology provides a definitive, though totally toxic, explanation for all your failures.
It replaces self-doubt with righteous anger.
It transforms internal weakness into an external righteous crusade against a perceived enemy. It feels powerful.
And this appeal to certainty, it has to be built on a really specific and powerful narrative, one that frames all these personal grievances as some kind of systemic, societal injustice.
It is. It's built entirely on that.
And at the heart of that narrative is the idea of hypergamy, right? The belief that women are biologically hardwired to only seek out the highest status men available, regardless of anything else.
That concept is the absolute linchpin. It's what holds the whole thing together. And it leads directly to what they call the 80-20 principle, which is the most popular incel belief.
Explain that one.
This belief dictates that 80% of women are only sexually and romantically interested in the most attractive 20% of men, the so-called chads.
Leaving the other 80% of men with nothing.
Exactly. It leaves the remaining 80% of men, the betas or the incels, destined for loneliness and relational failure, no matter what their character is or how much effort they put in.
So it creates a sexual caste system. What does believing in a system like that do to the self-identity of the men in that bottom 80%?
It creates a sense of absolute fatalism and profound injustice. It justifies withdrawal and it justifies rage.
And the research backs this up, that this belief is widespread.
It really does. The research confirms just how widespread it is. Nearly 2/3 of incels surveyed personally agree with this biological determinism. They view it as an unchangeable fact.
Wow.
And even more astonishing, 4/5, 80% believe that most other incels agree with it. It's the communal cement of their shared misery. It reinforces the idea that they're all just victims of an unfair biological reality.
So if the game is rigged by nature,
Then why bother striving for connection or self-improvement? They feel like they're just accepting their fate in this toxic script.
that internal consistency, it just reinforces the victimhood identity over and over. If everyone you talk to agrees the game is rigged, then your anger feels completely justified.
Absolutely. And that victimhood narrative, it requires clearly identified outgroups. It needs enemies who are responsible for maintaining this rigged system.
This is where we can look at it through the lens of radicalization theory.
Exactly. Specifically, the narrative component of that theory.
For a listener who might not be familiar with that academic theory, could you briefly explain what that lens of radicalization looks at here?
Of course. The 3N theory of radicalization basically suggests that individuals move toward extremism when they have an unmet need like validation or belonging.
Which we just talked about.
Right. And that need is then fulfilled by a unifying narrative, the ideology of blame, which is then reinforced by a network, which is the online community.
So here we're focused on the narrative, the assignment of blame.
Crucial. And our research reveals a very clear hierarchy of perceived enemies. There's a ranked list.
Who's at the top of that hierarchy?
Consistently, overwhelmingly, the number one enemy is feminists. They are seen as the biggest enemy, responsible for destabilizing traditional gender roles, promoting what they call slut culture, and creating the sexual marketplace that they despise.
And after feminists.
Following them are the political left, who are viewed as enabling these cultural shifts. Then, wider society, for perpetuating the unfair system. And only then, finally, do you get to women themselves, who are accused of manipulative behavior, vanity, or promiscuity.
You know, what's so insightful about that ordering is how abstract the initial targets are. Feminists, the political left.
Right, it's not personal at first.
It abstracts the grievance into a kind of cultural war before it directs the hatred at the specific people they might interact with or want to interact with. It's like it justifies the interpersonal hatred through political theory.
It makes the hatred seem rational and systemic, not just personal and petty. And once they have the pain, the certainty, and the identified enemy, well, that's when the digital world takes over.
Okay, so we've established the why, that profound vulnerability, and the toxic, rigid ideology. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. How does this toxic network actively capture and accelerate these vulnerable young men so incredibly quickly? This is about the digital architecture that facilitates radicalization.
This is critical because the research makes it abundantly clear that this process is largely an active, structural failure of platform design. It's not just that these forms exist, it's that the algorithmic acceleration is almost mandatory for platform success.
And the sources show that the pathway to radicalization, it often begins with these incredibly innocent searches. A young man searches how to get a girlfriend or confidence tips on YouTube or TikTok or Reddit.
Totally normal self-improvement searches, not extremist searches at all.
Right.
That's the benign entry point into what we term the rabbit hole. The user is just seeking answers to loneliness. However, the algorithms, which are driven by commercial objectives, they very quickly seize control. These platforms are explicitly optimized for watch time and clicks.
Which means they prioritize content that guarantees high engagement.
And what we see from repeated studies of algorithmic design is that nothing drives high engagement better than outrage, conflict, and anger, the very ingredients in the red pill message.
It's the rage bait.
It's the rage bait. If a user watches one video about confidence, the system rapidly learns that this aggressive, victim-blaming, anti-feminist narrative keeps the user hooked significantly longer than, say, a genuine guide to social skills. So the systems they steer users toward Manosphere content.
We actually have quantifiable data on the speed of this ideological funnel. This isn't just theoretical, this is measured acceleration.
And the speed is the single most alarming finding. A comprehensive study analyzed recommendation pathways on TikTok, and it found that initial exposure to just mild self-help content, it led to the recommendation of extreme misogynistic content within just 10 views.
10 views.
10 views for 60% of the test accounts.
That's horrifyingly fast.
Think about the implications of that. It takes less than 5 minutes of scrolling, maybe even 90 seconds, to go from benign advice like how to dress better to extremist rhetoric about Chads and Stacys, or narratives about female manipulation.
So it's not a slow migration or a user actively seeking out niche content. That's the platform actively pushing them down a slide toward radicalization.
It is an active grooming process, and it's executed by proprietary code. And this leads directly to a profound content saturation.
Meaning you just can't escape it once you're in that lane.
Exactly. Our investigation found that a staggering 80% of Manosphere videos across these platforms contain measurable, misogynistic language. The algorithm isn't just allowing the content to exist.
It's prioritizing it.
It is prioritizing, boosting, and monetizing harmful, hateful content, because that's what generates the highest engagement metrics. And that serves the platform's profit motive over any kind of ethical or social responsibility.
And the devastating consequence of this algorithmic failure is this escalation from, internal personal grievance to external deep-seated hatred and increasingly to real-world violence.
This is no longer simply an online subculture. It has become a demonstrable domestic threat.
We're moving far beyond just venting online and into quantifiable threat assessment territory.
Absolutely. The sources, including the FBI's 2024 threat assessment, specifically noted incel ideology as a growing, quantifiable domestic terrorism risk. And we've seen a concerning 30% increase in incel-related online threats just since 2020. The rhetoric found online, it's not just passive venting. It involves actively fantasizing about violence, often using coded terms like going ER, which is a reference to the spree killer Elliot Rodger.
What does the data tell us about the actual belief in violence within these communities? How many people actually think it's okay?
Well, the ideology itself is highly permissive toward violence against anyone who opposes the narrative. The survey findings on violence endorsement are alarming. A full quarter of incels, 25% of the sample, felt that violence was sometimes or often justified against those they perceived as seeking to harm them.
1 in 4.
1 in 4. Now, the average response was lower, but the fact that a quarter of participants condone violence as a justifiable response, that represents a massive active threat indicator.
And we have seen the ultimate tragic consequences of this algorithmic failure, the direct link to mass violence.
The pattern is undeniable. These platforms create pipelines that transform vulnerable young men into perpetrators. I mean, we can cite the 2014 Isla Vista rampage carried out by Elliot Rodger. He killed 6 people, injured 14.
And his history showed this pattern.
His actions were preceded by deep immersion in online forums and algorithm-fed video recommendations that validated his feelings of rejection and encouraged him to externalize his blame.
And the Toronto van attack.
Similarly, the 2018 Toronto van attack, where Alec Manassian killed 10 people, that was inspired by incel posts on Reddit that were amplified through recommendation threads.
This pathway also seems to specifically target the most vulnerable group, high school and college-age men who are struggling with isolation.
That's where the systemic failure hits the hardest. A recent report linked 40% of recent school shootings to online radicalization. The perpetrators were consuming algorithm-fed content on isolation and revenge. And this consumption, it transforms their private personal pain into a public premeditated danger.
The documented real-life scenarios detailed in the sources, I think they're critical to really underscore the graphic danger here.
The graphic illustrations show the sheer immediate human cost. I mean, consider the case of the high school student in Texas. He was struggling with rejection, and he searched for benign dating advice on YouTube.
Just like we talked about.
Just like we talked about. The algorithms immediately recommended red pill videos. That linked him to incel rants that glorified past shooters as supreme gentlemen. This rabbit hole fostered such extreme rage that the student assembled a homemade explosive. He was planning to detonate it at a school dance, specifically targeting popular girls.
And his plot was averted.
Thankfully, it was averted, but it demonstrated that the content he consumed made the violence feel not just possible, but, in his words, inevitable.
And the harm isn't always mass violence, is it? Sometimes it's personal assault inspired by that toxic script of perceived dominance and control.
Yes. We have the case of the college freshman in California. After a painful breakup, he was just inundated with TikTok alpha male clips preaching dominance and emotional control.
So when he experienced a simple rejection at a party,
he snapped. He violently assaulted a peer. And he later admitted that the algorithm turned my pain into poison. These cases, they just illustrate the graphic, immediate risk when technology platforms prioritize maximizing user engagement over the ethical and moral implications of the radicalizing content they promote.
So if the last section focused on the external threat, the violence, this next section seems to focus on the profound internal damage. It really confirms that this is, first and foremost, a devastating mental health crisis that's just masked by all this misogynistic rhetoric.
That's exactly right.
And the largest primary investigations of incel attitudes, they all confirm that these communities are reservoirs of immense personal suffering. The rage we see directed outward is actually just a secondary symptom of these deep internal wounds.
Absolutely. The levels of psychological distress are pervasive and they're severe. We're talking about a population that is exhibiting significant, measurable mental health challenges.
What kind of numbers are we looking at?
Over a third of incels meet the clinical criteria for moderate depression, that's 38.9%, and moderate anxiety, which is 43%.
And the loneliness.
The isolation they feel is statistically profound. Nearly half, 48%, selected the highest possible response on loneliness measures. That indicates chronic, deep isolation.
That's so far beyond the baseline population distress.
It's critically deep. But the most troubling finding, the one that really underscores where the primary risk lies, is the rate of suicidal ideation.
Okay.
A staggering 21.6% of the sample reported suicidal thoughts nearly every day.
Nearly every day.
Nearly every day.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective, that is a monumental internal crisis. This confirms that while they do pose an external threat to others, the greatest and most immediate threat these men face is directed inward, toward themselves.
And their history, it seems to show a life path that's just paved with adversity, which predisposes them to these feelings of victimhood.
Correct. This group reports statistically extreme levels of social adversity. And that feeds directly into their feelings of victimhood and their heightened rejection sensitivity.
You're talking about bullying.
Very high rates of bullying and rejection throughout their childhood. 86% say they experienced some form of bullying in childhood.
86%.
Compare that to only 33% of the general population. This history of victimization, it creates an acute, measurable rejection sensitivity that the ideology then perfectly exploits and justifies. It tells them, see, society has always targeted you.
So we have all this data now, and it's allowing researchers to move beyond just describing the problem and into developing these sophisticated models to explain how these harmful attitudes develop.
Right. And this is the dual pathways hypothesis of incel harm. It's a new model that distinguishes two distinct routes leading men toward these harmful attitudes and beliefs.
That feels like a crucial distinction. It tells us it's not a monolithic group of angry men, but different psychological profiles all arriving at the same toxic conclusions.
And that likely requires different interventions.
Exactly.
Precisely. The pathways are conceptually distinct, although, they can overlap. Pathway 1 is dispositional extremism.
Dispositional, meaning it's rooted in their personality.
Yes, this trajectory is rooted in dispositional traits. Core personality features like high scores on the dark triad.
Could you briefly explain what the dark triad is for the listener who hasn't encountered that academic terminology before?
Of course, the dark triad refers to three related but distinct negative personality traits. You have narcissism, which is grandiosity and entitlement, psychopathy, which is a lack of empathy and antisocial behavior, and Machiavellianism, which is manipulation and cynicism.
Okay.
Individuals who score high on these traits, they already possess a propensity for dominance, for hostility, and a profound sense of entitlement. For them, the incel or red pill ideology isn't a cure for loneliness.
It's a tool.
It's an empowering tool they can use to justify their existing darker tendencies. It enables their manipulation and aggression.
So the ideology gives the pathway one individual a ready-made script for dominating others, which they already wanted to do. What about the second path?
Pathway 2 is psychosocial vulnerability. This trajectory emphasizes experiential factors and neurodiversity. This group is driven not by a need to dominate, but by intense feelings of rejection, isolation, and genuine social confusion.
And this is the path that links strongly to neurodiversity.
Yes, it does. They exhibit a significantly elevated rate of autistic traits. Around 30% of the sample meet the clinical cutoff for an autism referral.
30%. That's dramatically higher than the general population.
Dramatically. And individuals on the autism spectrum, they often struggle intensely with the ambiguity, the nuance, and the complex nonverbal cues that are inherent in romantic and social contexts.
So for the pathway 2 man, the incel ideology is appealing because it offers certainty. It explains the confusing world of dating with these clear, deterministic, albeit toxic rules.
That is the exact function it serves. It offers clear black and white scripts like the 80-20 principle as simplified explanations for why they consistently fail to attract a partner. It replaces their social confusion with a rigid, false certainty.
And other factors on this path.
Other contributing factors include low self-perceived mate value and adverse childhood experiences, like persistent bullying or abuse, which feed into a chronic sense of victimization.
This model seems to fundamentally redirect where we should focus our efforts. It's not one problem, it's at least two.
It really does. The key insight from the pathway analysis is that poor mental health and ideological adherence were found to be twice as predictive of harmful attitudes, things like displaced aggression, hostile sexism, condoning violence, than mere networking time spent in the communities.
So the belief is more powerful than the community itself.
It proves that the vulnerability and the belief system are powerful drivers before deep community immersion even takes place. These men arrive broken, and the ideology ensures they stay broken by transforming their pain into poison.
Okay, that dual pathways model really helps us understand the internal wiring. Now I want to swing back to the external observable friction, that contradiction I saw at the dinner party. Why does adopting this supposedly empowering red pill script actively degrade the individual's well-being and cause the exact emotional fragility we see in real time?
Because the ideology mandates a state of being that is just fundamentally incompatible with genuine emotional resilience and healthy human connection. It imposes immense emotional repression and stress.
Right, the core of the red pill script is this glorification of stoicism and holding frame, the performance of being an unshakable alpha.
Yes, and that encourages the suppression of vulnerability, sadness, and fear. They believe these emotions are weak.
But suppressing them doesn't make them go away.
Ironically, this emotional bottling prevents the development of genuine resilience. It leads directly to high rates of internal issues, including depression, anxiety, irritability, and even chronic physical stress. They are substituting true strength with a brittle defensive shell.
So when that shell gets chipped, say, by a waiter's mistake, the entire system collapses.
That's the psychological fuel behind the Diet Coke meltdown in your opening anecdote.
Right.
Precisely. And that links directly back to a fragile self-worth. The red pill script ties a man's value rigidly to external dominance, control, or status, the high-value male. His self-worth is based entirely on the performance of control.
So when that control is threatened,
when self-worth is based on maintaining absolute external control, any perceived failure, a simple lack of compliance from a waiter, a job loss, a relationship setback, it's not just a disappointment, it's a catastrophic blow to their entire identity.
it's an existential threat.
And that failure spirals instantly into intense shame and self-loathing, which triggers the violent performative emotional snap that you witnessed.
And if they ever manage to get into a relationship, how does this belief system destroy the very connection they supposedly desire?
It creates a state of chronic mistrust. When the ideology insists that relationships have to be viewed through a lens of profound suspicion, That women are always hypergamous or manipulative or transactional authentic intimacy becomes impossible.
You can't build trust on a foundation of suspicion.
You cannot build genuine connection on a foundation of such deep cynicism. You are always waiting for the hypergamy clock to run out or for your partner to manipulate you. And this actively deepens the very isolation and loneliness the ideology was supposed to cure. They construct a prison of their own making.
So recognizing this immense internal pain and the completely counterproductive nature of the ideology, that has to be the first step toward any kind of intervention.
Both in therapy and in personal relationships, yes.
So if a therapist encounters a client who is fully immersed in this worldview, how should they approach the core toxic beliefs without immediately triggering all that defensiveness and the us versus them mindset?
The sources outline a very clear clinical strategy. The core technique is to initially focus on pragmatic goals, not on political deconstruction.
So you don't argue about the ideas.
You don't. If the client's stated goal is, I want successful future relationships, or I want to feel less angry, the therapist avoids getting into a debate about feminism or hypergamy. Instead, they use a pragmatic, evidence-based approach. They ask, is that method, your anger, your rigidity, your public snapping, is that working towards your goal of successful relationships?
So the approach avoids labeling the ideology as wrong and instead just labels the behavior as ineffective.
Exactly. They have to be encouraged to challenge the contradictions. The therapist helps the client recognize how their rigid, belief-driven behaviors, like that aggressive reaction to the wrong order, actively undermine the genuine connection and respect they claim to be seeking.
And then the interventions have to address the roots, right? The things we identified in the dual pathways model.
Which means targeting the underlying mental health issues and the skill deficits.
Yeah.
Precisely. This means treating the profound poor mental health, the depression, and the anxiety, and improving their self-perceived mate value through concrete actions. Things like dating skills training and comprehensive social skills programs.
And those social skills programs would be especially important for that group with autistic traits.
They're crucial for that large subgroup. They need clear, non-ideological scripts for social interaction to replace the toxic ones that the Manosphere offered them.
Now, since the Manosphere narrative frames feminists and the political left as the primary enemies, what kind of messengers are actually effective in de-radicalization? Does the message matter more than the messenger?
The messenger is vital. This speaks to the credibility factor. Because incels view outsiders as hostile and biased, effective de-radicalization often requires credible insiders.
People who have been there.
Exactly. Individuals who have successfully disengaged from the black pill mentality. You see this in online communities like the subreddit Rinslexit. These former adherents can offer authentic, powerful counter-narratives that resonate because they come from someone who gets it. Someone who has lived the pain and knows the toxic script intimately, but chose to leave it.
Finally, we have to consider the immense burden on partners. What does this research mean for a partner who's witnessing a loved one adopt these rigid, hostile views? I'm thinking of the case in our sources of the partner who was accused of being hired only through a diversity quota instead of on her own merit.
For partners, the challenge involves just immense emotional labor and the necessity of establishing clear, firm boundaries. The suggested strategy involves what we could call a rational challenge.
What does that look like?
It means demanding the partner address the person they're interacting with, the specific relationship they share, the objective facts of the situation, rather than letting them hide behind the abstract ideology they're consuming.
Can you give me a concrete example of that challenge in that specific scenario?
Okay, so if the man devalues his partner's promotion by saying, you only got that job because of diversity quotas, hypergamy rewards you, the partner has to set a boundary. A boundary that demands he look at her specifically.
Get out of the abstract and into the real.
Yes. She demands he assesses her specific competencies, her track record, the actual dynamics of the relationship. It forces him out of the ideological abstraction and back into reality. She must demand he respects her as an individual, not as a representative of some fictional Stacy.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It's essential for protecting the partner's self-respect and well-being. But we have to acknowledge that this boundary setting and this emotional labor is extremely taxing. And sometimes withdrawal from the relationship becomes the necessary path to self-preservation.
That makes sense.
We've traced a really comprehensive trajectory today. We went from profound personal isolation and statistically verifiable insecurity through algorithmic grooming that accelerates hateful views in mere minutes, all the way to the adoption of a rigid defensive ideology.
And the data confirms that this adherence, it just actively degrades their own mental health and prevents any kind of genuine human connection.
Ultimately, the crisis of incel and red pill ideology is primarily a severe, widespread mental health crisis. It's a desperation for control and connection that's been masked and amplified by misogynistic rhetoric and the fundamental profit-driven failures of algorithmic design.
The sources show, time and again, that the path to real influence, to satisfaction and connection, it does not lie in adopting a rigid script of dominance and emotional repression that preaches stoic detachment, only to fail spectacularly in the face of a minor human error, like the wrong drink order. Instead, the only route to the meaningful connection these men are so desperate for is found in having the courage to embrace genuine emotional vulnerability, the very trait this toxic ideology labels as weakness. That is the knowledge for you to mull over.